Hello and welcome to Conversations with B'nai B'rith International. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for spending some time with us today. If you enjoy our conversations, make sure you never miss a program by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel and liking us on Facebook. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our work across the globe. Today, I'll be speaking with Jonathan Brent, the Executive Director of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. We'll be talking about legendary Russian actor Solomon Mikhoels' life and career, particularly within the context of Soviet politics, and his assassination by Stalin's secret police, officially billed as an accident. But before we begin our interview, let me briefly set the stage for today's conversation. Beginning around 1900, an emerging Russian avant-garde brought a new audience to the visual and performing arts, set apart from the rarefied world of the elite. By 1918, post-revolution, the avant-garde had reached its creative and popular height. And the Soviet government established government-sponsored schools led by prominent artists, composers, and theater professionals, including many who were Jewish. Through these schools, the creative class promoted ways to introduce arts into all aspects of life. Moscow's National Yiddish Art Theater, known as Gosset, was at the forefront of artistic innovation, presenting plays by Avram Goldfaden, Sholem Aleichem, Ayel Peretz, and others. Its aesthetic was rooted in the play's folk origins, revealed through expressive and stylized acting, the incorporation of ethnic dances, and the use of fantastical set designs. The theater's stage designer, the distinguished painter Marc Chagall, inspired this approach through his imagery. Gosset's shows brought Chagall's paintings to life and garnered legions of fans. As Gosset's leading actor and then artistic director from 1928, Solomon Mikhoels introduced elements of naturalism and psychology to the company's trademark style. And critics praised his interpretation of Shakespeare's King Lear, which transcended the constrictions of Stalin's socialist realism. Mikhoels quickly became a star, his name known to audiences worldwide, and his talents recognized by the Soviet government. After the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union in December 1941, Mikhoels was appointed chair of the new Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. In 1943, Mikhoels traveled to the United States, where he made public appearances and met with Jewish and non-Jewish officials, all to raise funds for the Red Army. His role as the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee's goodwill ambassador expanded his public image, and many regarded him as a leader and the key Jewish representative in the Soviet Union. With that, it's my honor to welcome historian Jonathan Brent, Executive Director of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. We'll delve into Solomon Mikhoels' life and career, why Stalin had Mikhoels murdered, and the political repercussions of his assassination. Jonathan, great to have you with us.
Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, first of all, really, I want to thank you and YIVO for all the important work that you do in terms of preserving Yiddish culture, researching Yiddish culture. I'm the child of Yiddish speakers. My father was a subscriber to one of the Yiddish newspapers, Der Tag Morgen Journal. So I had Yiddish come into the house actually every day by mail, which is how he received the newspaper. We lived in New Hampshire. And we know how important Yiddish culture and the Yiddish language have been in Jewish history. And of course, YIVO really is at the very center of the preservation of all of that and the research, and we thank you for it. Well, let's start off with a comparison of the status of Jews in Russia during the Tsarist era and how it changed during and after the Bolshevik Revolution. And how did Lenin consider and treat the Jews after 1917?
Well, I think one of the first things we have to understand is that there were many Jewish communities. There was not one community. There was not one prevailing political idea. There were communists, there were Zionists, there were Bundists, there were socialists, there were atheists, there were those who wanted to forget the whole mess and just go to America and become Americans. There were many who wished to assimilate into Polish culture, into Russian culture. And so there were Jewish capitalists, and there were Jewish workers, and there were many different streams. It's true that many well-educated Jews, as well as working Jews, gravitated toward the Communist Party, but this represented actually a minority of the Jewish world of Eastern Europe, largely Yiddish speaking. However, one thing to understand about this world of Yiddish speaking Jews is that they were all multilingual. They could speak Polish and Russian, many spoke German. And so it was a diverse world that Lenin inherited. He inherited the ardency of many young Jews who had protested against and fought against the czarist oppression of Jews. But he also inherited Jewish craftsmen and Jewish artists and Jewish capitalists for whom he had no use whatsoever. And so Lenin's response was, on the one hand, welcoming to the Jewish intelligentsia, which he valued, and the Jewish communists, whom he valued, but by and large, rejecting great swath of the Jewish people. For instance, in, I believe it's 1919, during the pogroms, he receives a desperate letter from the head of the Jewish community, one of the Jewish communities in Ukraine. Pogroms, Jews are being killed mercilessly. Please send help. Please stop this. And we have the document, which we found in the archive, of Lenin simply saying, into the archive. That is to say, forget it. Let the Ukrainians do whatever it is they want to do with the Jews, because he and Stalin after him saw the Jews not only as potential allies or potential enemies, but as tools with which to manipulate the public opinion of Soviet society, and in this case, the Ukrainians. A way of bringing the Ukrainians into the revolution, into the Soviet world, is for them to realize that they can beat up the Jews. And that's what they did. And that's what happened. And Babel records this at great length in Red Cavalry and many other places. And we have documentation from the Lenin archive that shows this to be so.
How large a community are we talking about in 1917?
The majority of the Jewish world lived in Eastern Europe and Russia at that point. Maybe close to 9 million people, of whom probably 6 million were Yiddish speaking and had been packed into the Pale of Settlement.
And ultimately, how were Jews classified? You talked about all of the different parts of the Jewish community, that it wasn't just a monolithic group of A or B, but in the official Soviet
nationality,
they were treated as a nationality. Is that different than an ethnic group? How was that done?
It was treated as a nation. Jews were treated like Ukrainians. It's a nation. Jews were treated like Germans, like Poles, and on your passport, when it says nationality, it would say Jewish. So yes, the Anabaptists weren't identified as Anabaptists in the Ukraine. They were identified as Ukrainians. Maybe unofficially, people understood them to be Anabaptists, but as a Jew, you were part of a nation.
So at what point, was it immediate after November 1917, or did it take a while? At what point did Jews need to suppress their faith, or I should say, was their faith suppressed and their religion suppressed in order to conform to communist society?
Well, the Soviet government had I'm not being facetious here, they had a very hard job. The job was they have this enormous multinational state that they have inherited that has Ukrainians and Poles and Jews and Germans and Lithuanians and Catholics and Uniates and Eastern Orthodox and Papists and so on and so forth. And it's an awful lot to deal with. And they had to try to bring each of the groups into the communist orbit. And part of the strategy, which in fact Stalin outlines in a speech that he gives in Ukraine, is to let each of the nationalities develop according to the principles of their own natural development. Let them develop fully. And then, as Stalin says, let them exhaust themselves. And then the Soviet Union will require that they become Sovietized completely. And so this pattern of allowing Ukrainian culture to flourish, allowing Lithuanian culture to flourish, allowing German culture to flourish, also Tatar culture to flourish, also applied to the Jews. And so in the early days, Lenin and Stalin were both, after the Civil War is over in 1921, very, very receptive to Jews coming to the Soviet Union. It became a mecca of Yiddish-speaking Jews. There was more Yiddish publishing done in the Soviet Union than in any country in the world at that point. And Jews from America went back to Russia from where they had emigrated maybe 20 years previously. Mikhoels himself is in a film about such a situation. And there they found what? They found that there were Yiddish publications where they could get their work published. They had Yiddish readers. They felt themselves supported by the state. And it was a beautiful and wonderful thing for many Yiddish-speaking Jews at that time. By 1929, and by the mid-1930s, this all came to a stop.
I was going to ask you, so there's 7 years between the revolution and the death of Lenin. And now you were at 1929. What were the immediate repercussions for the Jewish community once Stalin took over?
Well, the immediate repercussions once Stalin took over were not directed at them as Jews. They really weren't. And in all of the controversy with Trotsky, for instance, and in all of whatever letters we have from Stalin in which he refers to Trotsky and others, he never refers to them as Jews. He refers to them as anti-Lenin, as anti-Soviet, but not as Jews, not those dirty Jews, not those scheming Jews. There isn't a single whiff of that in all of his letters to Molotov or to Kaganovich. Now, Kaganovich was Jewish and Molotov was married to a Jewish woman, so it may have been something that restrained Stalin, who in private, as Khrushchev writes in his memoirs, was a primitive, as Khrushchev was a primitive anti-Semite. He had many anti-Semitic beliefs. There's no question about that. But officially, anti-Semitism had been legally abolished. It was against the law to be anti-Semitic. And Stalin observed this in much and probably most, if not all, of the public representation of his policies. So to begin with, the Jews as an ethnic group were not under attack. They did not feel under attack. The war with, and besides which, Stalin had his hands full with Trotsky. Stalin's main problem after Lenin's death was Trotsky and the group around Trotsky that included Jews to a great extent. Not all, but to a great extent. But this was never thought of or officially cast as a Jewish conspiracy against Stalin, against Leninism, against the Soviet state. And so Jews who were not part of the Trotsky way of thinking or whatever had really nothing to worry about in those years.
Well, Mikhoels' gifts were certainly recognized by many people, by the Soviet government in the 1930s. He was a Stalin Prize laureate. Tell us about how he came to Stalin's attention and how Stalin's opinion of him changed to the point that we have his murder, this assassination of Mikhoels post-World War II.
See, I don't think Stalin's opinion ever changed. I don't think it ever did. He never really valued Mikhoels. He never really cared. He saw Mikhoels as a tool. The Yiddish theater was a tool. It was a tool for rallying Jews to Soviet society. And if you watch the movies of Mikhoels, and yes, he makes use of expressionist and other really fantastically interesting aesthetic elements that caught the eye of writers about the avant-garde in Germany when the Moscow Yiddish theater toured in Germany. And it was deemed by some to be the most avant-garde artistic form in the world at that point. But the content, which is what Stalin was interested in, the content was Soviet. And we see this over and over and over again. And so Mikhoels was useful. And then comes World War II. And here is Mikhoels, who is the leader of the Moscow Yiddish Theater, one of the most internationally respected developments of Jewish culture in the 20th century, known worldwide, with a reputation in the United States. And so he becomes, again, useful. He is useful to Stalin. Why? And here's where the anti-Semitic element sort of comes in, as a journalist pointed out in 1943 after Mikhoels' trip to the United States. The Soviets really thought that the Jews in the United States controlled the media, controlled public opinion, that they controlled government, and all of these things. So it was perfect to send him to America in 1943 after he was appointed head of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. And by the way, there were many anti-fascist committees. It wasn't just a Jewish anti-fascist committee. There was a Ukrainian anti-fascist committee. There were many anti-fascist committees for each of the nationalities. But it was obvious that Mikhoels is the one who should go to America, because that's where the rich Jews are, because that's where the Jews have Hollywood, because that's where the Jews can exert public opinion. And indeed, for better or for worse, it worked. Mikhoels met with everyone. Madison Square Garden was overflowing with people listening to him. He met with LaGuardia, he met with Einstein, he met with Charlie Chaplin. So in a way, Stalin wasn't wrong.
We have in our B'nai B'rith magazine at that time, there are items about that visit. Was the enthusiasm with which he was received, how was that message interpreted back in Moscow? Because he was received clearly with a great deal of friendship. How was that seen? What did somebody say back in Moscow? Wow, we made a mistake by by having this fellow go to the United States, and now he's a larger than life personality?
No, not at all. Not at all. The Soviets were desperate for American involvement in the war. They were desperate for the Second Front to be opened. That's what Stalin keeps asking Roosevelt to do. Open the Second Front, open the Second Front. Eventually, of course, the Second Front is opened in Italy and then in Normandy. But the trip of Mikhoels was the trip of the last country of Europe that was standing. It came after the point at which Jews in the United States had already learned, many had already learned of what the Nazis were doing in Auschwitz and with their mobile killing units and murdering all of the Jews of Europe. And so the Soviet Union, Stalin, for everything that we hate about him, for being the murderer that he was, would not give in. No step backwards was his order to the troops at Stalingrad. No, not one step backwards. You step backwards, you get shot. And they fought like devils, and often without guns, without proper ammunition. But at Stalingrad and then at Kursk, the war turned around. But he was desperate for money. He was desperate because their tanks were no match for the Panzer tanks. Their airplanes were no match for the Luftwaffe. They had to overwhelm them with numbers. And so American Lend-Lease, American technology was crucial to the Soviet war effort, but it was the Soviets who fought. And so the Jews, and there, by the way, were many Jewish generals. There were many Jewish war heroes. The Jews of the Soviet Union were the most decorated ethnic group in the Soviet Union coming out of World War II. They showed unbelievable bravery. And it was the Jews' fervor for Stalin's success that helped to fuel Mikhoels' trip in the United States. It wasn't just Mikhoels' celebrity at that point. It was the desperation of the Jewish people, knowing that their millions left in Europe, left behind in Europe, were being annihilated. And so, of course, there was this enthusiasm. It didn't come from American Jewish communists or Bolsheviks. It came from Jews who had a love of their people.
Actually, I have a cousin just passed away several years ago in Israel who fought in the Battle of Kursk and was decorated. And I think there may have been as many as 500,000 Soviet Jews who fought in the Red Army during the entirety of the war. What happened after the war that affected Stalin's attitude toward the Jews? Because we go into a period here in the last years of Stalin's life where things take really a terrible turn for the worse.
Yes, but nothing changed. We have to be clear about this. Nothing essentially changes because Stalin just uses you. You are just a pawn. If you do well, you get the Medal of Honor. You become a hero of the Soviet Union. But if you do better, if I can use you more effectively by killing you, then I'll do that. In other words, the fact that Mikhoels got them, and this was the horrible misunderstanding of Mikhoels and so many, they thought that because Stalin had honored them for their work, that therefore they might be able to make a petition to Stalin after the war for a Jewish homeland in the Crimea. And as Malenkov says to him, what were you thinking Are you insane? The one thing that Stalin was most concerned about with the Jews, with the Ukrainians, with the Poles, with every single ethnic group was nationalism. Nationalism. And why? Because the Soviet Union was a world in which Jew, Pole, German, Lithuanian, all the same. The fact that you have Jewish ideas, forget it. You are the same. You are the same Soviet individual. And all of a sudden, at the end of the war, Jews start petitioning. Mikhoels and the anti-fascist committee start petitioning for a homeland in the Ukraine, and they start writing things and making connections with government leaders like Malenkov and so on. And then Golda Meir comes to visit Moscow after the war, and Molotov's wife, Zhemchuzhina, is guiding her through the city because she's Jewish. She's a devout Bolshevik and Stalinist, by the way, Zhemchuzhina. And she is overheard to say to Golda Meir, Ich bin a Yiddische Tochter. And this gets back to Stalin. What? You're a daughter of the Jewish people? I thought you were a Soviet. You see? And then there's the question of divided loyalty. And this is the one thing that Stalin could not abide, was any divided loyalty. He cannot abide it in the 1920s, and he cannot abide it after the war. And in particular, after the war, he cannot abide it because A, he is in failing health. B, there is a new cadre of young Soviet politicians and war heroes, frankly, who want a change in the Soviet Union. B, America and American army and Soviet army, they pal around, they're good friends, they go drinking together. All of a sudden, there's a kind of a new opening spirit in Russia. Molotov himself gives an interview in which he says, I look forward to the day of relaxed censorship and a more liberalized society, and that drives Stalin out of his mind. So why? Why does it drive him out of his mind? Simply because he hates all of these things? No. It is that even before the war, he understood one thing. He understood that communism is a world enemy of capitalism. Now, before the war, there was Britain, France, and Germany. They all represented the capitalist world. America was kind of out of it. But America was part of it, but it wasn't the focus, the central focus. The central focus was the British Empire, the French, and the Germans. That they were the capitalist camp. And that was opposed to the communist camp. This is the way Stalin saw it. He didn't see that France was fighting Germany on behalf of freedom. He didn't believe in that freedom. He didn't believe in that democracy. He thought that was just a lie. But rather, it was two capitalist powers fighting with each other. And at the end of the war, who's left? America is left. America is the great capitalist camp now. And so it is inevitably going to go to war with the Soviet Union. That's the way he saw it. And all of this camaraderie between Americans and Soviets was just a smokescreen that the Americans were throwing up, or the naivete and gullibility of the Soviets, who were not going to put up a stiff enough defense against America at that point. And then when Golda Meir comes and Zhemchuzhina says, Ich bin a Yiddische Tochter, what it means is that the Jews of Russia are going to side with Israel. And Israel sides with whom? It sides with America. And therefore, the Jews of the Soviet Union become suspect to their core, And this goes way beyond anti-Semitism.
So tell us about the assassination of Mikhoels and what happened to other members of his circle and what happened to the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee.
Well, the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, of course, is abolished. And Mikhoels is assassinated in Minsk. It's initially described as an accident in which Mikhoels is run over by a truck, but most people didn't even believe it at the time. In fact, Svetlana, in her memoirs, writes that she overheard a conversation in which her father receives a phone call from the KGB.
This is the daughter of Stalin.
The daughter of Stalin. She overhears her father say, "So it's done. It's done." And he receives the news of Mikhoels' assassination, and he says, "It's done." Not, "Oh my God, what a disaster." And so what happens? Mikhoels is given a state funeral, obviously, because this is the way Stalin did everything. He disguised all of his motivation as much as he possibly could, but he has to get rid of the head. This is the way he did everything, and we see it over. I mean, this is just typical Stalinist behavior. He gets rid of the head of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, but that's clearly not enough, because if you disguise it as an accident, it's not sending the right message to the Jewish community, right? So therefore, the members of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee are by and large arrested, almost all of them. Do they pose a real threat to the Soviet Union? Obviously not. Is Jewish nationalism a threat to Soviet power? As many of them said, of course not. As Yitzhak Pfeffer, the poet who accompanied Mikhoels on his trip to the United States, says at his trial, no one has done more in 2,000 years than Stalin to erase the injustice meted out on the Jewish people by the Roman kings. That's what Yitzhak Pfeffer says at his trial. Stalin has done that. And Ettinger, the doctor who was also a member of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, but not put on trial with the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee, when he's interrogated, he says, "How can I be anti-Soviet? How? The Soviet Union rescued the remnant of my people. Without the Soviet Union, the Jewish people would have been totally annihilated, and millions more would have died." And besides which, Ettinger had adopted a son from the ghetto of Minsk who had been rescued by a Russian woman. And he says it's impossible for a Jew in the Soviet Union to be anti-Soviet. But Stalin didn't see things that way. He saw things in very categorical terms. That is to say, in terms of nationalism.
And it continues to get worse as we, in the lead up to Stalin's death in 1953, the doctor's plot, the shadows that seem to be cast over the Jewish community. What might have happened had Stalin not died in 53? What would this have stopped at a certain point, or would have expanded?
Well, I have a very bleak view of what would have happened, which is a little, everything is speculative. But Stalin had so much power concentrated in his hands that it is very, very doubtful that anyone would have been able to oppose him had he remained healthy. And it would not only have been the destruction, I believe the total destruction of Jewish culture in the Soviet Union. I know, because I have the documents, that 4 new concentration camps, 4 new gulags had been built in the Soviet Union. The order was given in 1952 to build these 4 concentration camps. And the excuse or the rationalization for the building of these camps in the Far East was for especially dangerous Austrian war criminals, where at that time there were about 9,000 Austrian war criminals left in the Soviet Union. You could put them all into apartment buildings in downtown Moscow. You don't need 4 concentration camps for these. And what my co-author of Stalin's Last Crime, Vladimir Pavlovich Naumov, told me was that when he was a young man, he was told by a friend of his who had worked on one of the camps that it was widely understood that these camps were for the Jews. I don't think there is any question, but that Stalin would have followed through on the idea of exiling Jews to these camps from the cities, from Leningrad, from Moscow, from Kiev. Whether he would have murdered them, as Hitler did, is probably is improbable in my view, but he certainly would have segregated them from Soviet society. He would have decimated all elements of Jewish culture, and there would have been nothing. He would have just ground it to a nub. There would have been nothing left. And and the entire Jewish population would have been completely terrorized by this. But there's another element to all of this, which is that the Jews were never, and this is why he wouldn't have murdered them. The Jews were never his real target. The real target was always America. And it was the Jews who had sided with America through Israel. That was the problem. That you attack Israel, you attack the Jews, you attack Israel, you attack Israel, you attack America. It was America. And what Stalin was preparing for was a nuclear confrontation with the United States of America. He had this in mind. He clearly had this in mind. They had detonated an A-bomb in 1949. And in August 1953, they detonate the hydrogen bomb, which put them at nuclear parity with the United States. Beria knows.
Who's the head of the NKVD, the secret police?
He's the head of the secret police, but Stalin makes him, during the war years, the head of the atom bomb project. And he removes him from the NKVD, the KGB, and he becomes head of the atom bomb project. So Beria knows what the progress on the hydrogen bomb is. And it is very clear from the evidence after Stalin's death that Beria makes every effort to show the West that he is pulling back from the brink of a confrontation. Now, Eisenhower doesn't seem to understand the signals, and so the Cold War ramps up. But I am persuaded that Beria may well have had a hand in Stalin's death, and perhaps Khrushchev as well.
Well, just to wrap up, Jonathan, looking at Mikhoels' life, Mikhoels as a symbol, because as you said, the style here was Stalin's style was cut off the head. Looking at his life and his legacy from a 2021 perspective, how should Mikhoels be remembered as a Jewish figure, not only, of course, for his artistic achievements, but as one who had achieved a certain notoriety, largely in the West because of this trip to the United States, but as a possible, as you look forward, let's say, if there had been a post 1953 with Stalin, as kind of a not a competitor necessarily, but as one who would attract the attention of those, as you point out, of a possible leader of a Jewish nation, so to speak. So, how do you think he ought to be remembered?
I think he's a tragic figure, like so many. I think he was a devoted communist, and he was a devoted Jew. And the two, in the end, are irreconcilable. And he was torn apart. At the end of the war, his allegiance was perhaps divided in some way, but he felt a total responsibility to care for the Jewish people in the same way that Ehrenberg did, in the same way that Grossman did, to find a homeland for this people that had been ripped apart, which in no way diluted in one tiny bit his commitment to communism, to the Soviet communist ideals. He simply did not understand what he was doing. And he didn't understand that Stalin was more than willing to sacrifice the Jewish people for the Soviet ideal. And I think that would have been the point at which Mikhoels would have resisted. If it had ever become clear to him that this was the choice, this was the Sophie's choice, you have to give up the Jewish people to become a Soviet. I don't know, he might have committed suicide.
Jonathan, thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate talk about this extremely important period of Jewish history.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to YIVO Executive Director Jonathan Brent for joining me today and exploring the life, career, and assassination of Soviet Jewish actor Solomon Mikhoels and the aftermath of that assassination for the Jewish community in the Soviet Union. And thank all of you for tuning in to this conversation with B'nai B'rith. If you enjoyed this discussion, make sure you never miss a program by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel, liking us on Facebook, and following us on Twitter. And be sure to visit our website, bnaibrith.org, to learn more about our important work. For my guest, Jonathan Brent, I'm Dan Mariaschin. See you again soon.